All right, so we're just going to go with it and let people come in when they come in. Today, with exercise 121, we're going to talk about a concept in AutoCAD called Paperspace, or Paperspace versus Modelspace. And I think this is probably the single greatest feature of AutoCAD, and it's also the one that people never talk about. And you could take an AutoCAD class, and in fact most AutoCAD classes, and they focus so much on how you draw, and they focus very little on how you create quality drawings after the fact. So we've done drawing. Now it's going to be time to get that drawing onto a piece of paper. And that is something that's done in AutoCAD in something called Paperspace. And so today's lecture is all about that Paperspace, and we'll go through viewports and kind of how the whole thing gets set up. What we've been working in is something called Modelspace. And if you notice in the very bottom left corner of the screen, which is right behind my head here, there's a tab called Model. And that's the tab that you're currently working in. That Modelspace has a black background with white lines on it. And this, the key part about Modelspace is everything is full size. If a wall is 6 inches thick, it's 6 inches. If something is 20 feet long, it's 20 feet long. We draw it full scale. When we switch to Paperspace, that's where we apply it to a sheet of paper. That's why it's called Paperspace. We put our drawing on that sheet of paper, and we scale our drawing appropriately for that sheet of paper. So if you were working in a firm and you were doing working drawings using AutoCAD, obviously not Revit, we're speaking just to AutoCAD right now, you would be using Paperspace quite a lot. There's actually a whole series of steps for how you create your drawings and how you have a sheet set, what's called a sheet set, with a bunch of these Paperspace layouts so that you can actually create a whole big working drawing set. So for our purposes today, I'm going to assume that you've gotten to the point where you have your floor plan and you have your building elevations. If you haven't gotten all of your elevations yet, that's okay. You'll have some time in lab today to keep working on your elevations. But I'm going to move forward as if you have all your elevations done. The other thing that I'll point out is that I added a few extra contour lines in because it felt like there needed to be a few more contour lines. I just drew them in arbitrarily. So it's not something that is super scientific or super precise. I will also, as promised, come back at the end and walk you through how to calculate out the slope if you want to do that as part of your drawings. But let's focus on Paperspace first. So down at the bottom here, we have I have Modelspace, and then you probably have Layout 1 and Layout 2 set up as defaults. You may only have Layout 1. I'm not quite sure what AutoCAD comes up with as default. But I'm going to flip to Layout 1 first. Your Layout 1 isn't going to look like mine because that's my sample. And then I'll continue showing you how to set it up on Layout 2. But essentially, when I switch from Modelspace into Paperspace, I am now seeing a sheet of paper, and I'm seeing all of my drawings set up at a particular scale. These happen to all be a 1/4 inch equals a foot. So I have my floor plan, and I have my 4 elevation views. You'll see that when you switch to Paperspace, a couple things change. One, the background turns to white. That's because it's now on a sheet of paper. It's also a great way of confirming that your lines are set up correctly, because black is black, gray is gray, etc. So if you had, for example, some of you had you had chosen 255 white instead of the true white, and your stuff wasn't printing, and I told you, no, we got to switch it. And those of you that did that, you know who you are and you know how that happened. You would see it in Paperspace, where suddenly parts of your drawing wouldn't show up. So this is a good way of previewing your drawing. The other thing that shows up in Paperspace is line types. So some of you had put line types on. You'd used a hidden line, for example, and you said, well, wait a minute, I can't see any of the dashes. That's OK. It shows up in Paperspace. That's where you're going to see the hidden dashes, etc. So everything's geared toward setting up in Paperspace. Furthermore, if you were going to do any annotations to your drawing, like measurements, dimensions, title box, text, etc., that would show up in Paperspace as well. We're not going to be doing that here. We'll do a little bit of that in Illustrator Collage afterward, but we won't do it in AutoCAD. We're not going to do any dimensions on this either. So this is our goal, and that's what we're going to try to set up. For everybody that doesn't have this yet, which is all of you, I'm going to flip to a blank tab. And it doesn't matter which one it is. you guys may have layout 1, you may have layout 2. As long as it's just a default page, that's fine. You can create new layout tabs by clicking on the little plus sign next to where the layouts are. You can also rename the layouts. So here under layout 2, I could double click on it, and I could change this to 36 by 24, for example. It's not necessary that you change the label. I'm just telling you that so that you know. If you had multiple pages where you were trying to have a bunch of different layouts, you may end up needing to change the names so that you knew what was on each particular page. So I need to now set up a lot of the actual page so that I know how big the piece of paper is that I'm going to be working on and that sort of thing. And I'm going to do that by right-clicking on the name of the layout tab. So in my case, it's now 36 by 24. Yours, it could be layout 1, layout 2, etc. And once I do that, I'm going to go to the Page Setup Manager right here. And when I click on the Page Setup Manager, it brings up the Page Setup Manager dialog box. And we see my layout listed here. I'm going to click on this Modify button right here. And when I click on that Modify button, it's going to bring up something that looks an awful lot like the printing window that you've seen before. What we're doing here is we're pre-setting up everything from the printer to the size of the paper, all that stuff. So when we go to actually print it, it's all set and ready to go. And we don't have to change anything. So this says Page Setup, but it's a lot like the printing dialog box. So first thing I'll do is under Printer Plotter, we've been using at the bottom here this Publish to Web JPEG. We're going to pick one above it, which is the DWG to PDF. There are also other AutoCAD PDF options. I've just always had luck with the DWG to PDF, which is why I'm encouraging you to use it. It's just a personal preference. Any one of the PDF writers would essentially work for this. So that's going to be our printer. The next thing is paper size. We don't want our paper to be 8.5 by 11 anymore. We're going to change it to be an ArcD, which is a 24 by 36 sheet of paper. And so you'll see here ArcD 36 by 24 and ArcD 24 by 36. The width is first, so I want it to be 36 by 24. If I pick the wrong one, let's say I picked the ArcD, sorry, where is it? ArcD 24 by 36, you'd see it was like this. I could, however, switch it after the fact and it would change. I'm going to go ahead and stick with my 36 by 24, however. So I see my paper set up here, 24, 36, that's good. All of that looks good. We can always click on things like PDF options just to double check what's happening here. All the defaults are just fine. Good. What to plot? This is going to be not a window, not a drawing. It's going to be the layout. That's what it should be, because we want what we see on this page is what we want to print. So it's going to be layout. The other thing is under plot scale, we're going to be plotting at 1:1 scale, because this sheet at 24 by 36 is exactly what we're printing. So we don't want to apply any scales here. So it's going to be 1:1. Our plot style pen table assignments, we're going to use the default acad.ctb, which we used in the last class. Under quality, I'm going to go ahead and go up to maximum. We want to plot line weights. I'm not going to worry about transparency. We want to plot with our styles and plot Paperspace last. This one doesn't matter so much for us, but if we were putting in annotations like dimension lines and we wanted to make sure that those were on top of anything else, this option is important, because plotting Paperspace last basically says anything that I draw on this piece of paper, make sure it's on top of everything else. So usually that's on by default, which it is right now. And we could also hide all the Paperspace objects if we wanted to. I don't think that's an option that we need to worry about right now. And then our drawing orientation is already set up. So I've gone through all of these page setup requirements. I'll go ahead and say OK. And when I do that, you'll see that my paper size actually changed a bit. And that's because it's now the 24 by 36, which is what I wanted it to be. I'm going to go ahead and close the Page Setup Manager. And now we're down to seeing my piece of paper. And on this piece of paper, we have what is called a viewport right here. And this viewport is a window into our model space. It's a way of looking into our model space. I'm going to go ahead and move this viewport up so that you guys can see it a little bit better. There it is toward the top of the screen. I'm also going to make this a little bit bigger. And with this viewport, if I were to double click inside it, I could actually zoom in and see there's my drawing, and there, for example, is my floor plan. So I would double click to get outside of it, and now I can see my floor plan. This floor plan, however, isn't set to a specific scale just yet. So it's just arbitrary. It's just fitting inside of the viewport. If I want it to fit to a specific scale, I need to bring up the properties window, which we haven't dealt with too much just yet. I can get to that by just typing in properties and then pressing enter. And that brings up this properties window right here, which typically floats somewhere on your screen. Sometimes it minimizes, sometimes it maximizes. Because we're working in layouts, I actually like to dock this to the right side just so that I have it always up. I don't need the space for drawing right now, so it's good. I'm going to use this frequently today. So I'm going to click on the bar, the properties bar along here, and I'm going to drag it over to the right side of the screen. And at some point, it will disappear and give me a little dotted line. And when I let go, it'll dock it into the side there. And that just leaves it open all the time. That's a personal preference, but since we're going to be using the properties window quite a lot today, it's a good thing to just throw it over there and dock it. So now that it's docked over here, if I click on the viewport here, we can see information about the viewport, like what layer it's on, what the line type is, etc. That same thing happens for any object that we were to select. But if we keep coming down here, we can actually get to a place where it says standard scale and it says custom. It's because it's not in a standard scale yet. If I were to click on where it says custom, I can actually scroll through a variety of scales here. So here is a 1/16 of an inch equals a foot. There's an 1/8 of an inch equals a foot. And if I come down here to a 1/4 of an inch equals a foot, that's about the right scale for what I'm trying to show in this drawing. Most of you should be able to fit your floor plan and your 4 elevations on this piece of paper all at a 1/4 inch equals a foot. That's our desired scale. If you have a second story and you end up with 2 floor plans, you may have to change the scales a little bit. That's OK. But it's going to be around a 1/4 inch equals a foot is my guess. So I'm going to go ahead and click on a 1/4 inch equals a foot. And now this is set at a 1/4 inch equals a foot. Notice, though, that part of my drawing is getting clipped over here. If I were to double click inside of this viewport, I could then use the pan tool, or I could press down and hold the middle mouse button to pan, and I can move over my drawing so that it's more centered in this particular viewport. Now here's a risk. If I were to double click to get inside the viewport and then use my scroll wheel, which is very common, suddenly the scale changed, which is a problem. The other thing that can happen, which is even worse, is that you can zoom in. Oops, hold on. You can be zooming in and say, oh, I wanted to double check on the line weight over here, or something like that. And then you can double click, and you can say, oh, OK, that's great, I'll zoom in. Oh, wait a minute. I lost my page. So you can get yourself stuck. No matter how many times I zoom out, I'm stuck. I'm inside the viewport, but I've lost the page. So instead of doing that, I press Control-Z to jump backwards. I'm going to Control-Z one more time here. There we go. Now I'm outside of the viewport. I got myself out of that mistake. What we're going to do is once the viewport is set, here it is at a 1/4 inch equals a foot, right above it we can see Display Locked is set to No. I'm going to change that Display Locked to be set to Yes. So I set my scale first, then I lock the viewport, which means that if I double click and get inside the viewport and I zoom in, it's always going to not change the scale. So it's important for you guys to get in the habit of doing that. That also protects you from if you get inside here, you double click, and you work on it, you can still zoom yourself out and be OK. So I have my first viewport here. It's set at a 1/4 inch equals a foot. I have my drawing. That's great. It's time to bring in the next elevation. And so I want to show the south elevation right here below my drawing. And in order to do that, I need to add another viewport. So I'm going to come over into the Layout tab. So I'm at the Home ribbon. I'm going to come all the way across to Layout. And with the Layout ribbon active, I'm going to click on this rectangular button right here. And there's a subtle difference when they switched to AutoCAD 2019. This used to be a big button. It's now a small button. So it is what it is. So I'm going to click on that rectangular button. And then I can actually just draw another viewport. I could draw it, say, about like that. And this gives me another window into my model space. So we can zoom in here on my elevation. There it is. Same thing applies here, though. This is not at scale yet until I select the viewport, come over to my properties, and change the custom scale, the standard scale here to be 1/4 inch equals a foot. Now it's at its correct scale. Next thing I'm going to do is go into the display locked and change it to yes. And now I have my next viewport. There it is. I need the other 3 elevation views. I'm going to lay them out on the right side here. I'll come back in the layout ribbon to my rectangular viewport. I'm going to create another viewport. I'll double click and I'll zoom in. For me, it's always easier to get part of your drawing, basically kind of center your drawing in the viewport first, getting it close to scale and then adjusting the scale. The risk is that you're too far away, and when you go to set the scale, you end up not seeing anything in the viewport because it's not centered. So I always like to zoom in on my elevation first. There we go. And then I'll change and adjust the scale. So I'll come over here to my scale. We're going to change that to 1/4 inch equals a foot. There it is. And you say, OK, well, that's nice, but my elevation view is on the side. Well, I can take this viewport, and I can actually just rotate this viewport. So I'll use the rotate command. I'll type rotate. I could also go back to my home ribbon and choose the rotate button, which is right there. And I need to rotate this view. We'll rotate it like that. And suddenly, my building is in the correct orientation. This used to be a lot more complicated than it is now. I'm going to adjust the viewport a little bit so that I'm seeing my whole drawing. All right, there it is. Let me go ahead and use the Move tool. And we'll move that elevation right there. So once again, I'll go back. Oh, I should lock this. Display lock should be set to yes. There we go. Go back to the layout ribbon. Click on the rectangular viewport button. We're going to add another viewport. There it is. Double click to get inside it. I'm zoomed in on my elevation view. Double click to get outside of the viewport. I'm going to select the viewport and change the scale to 1/4 inch equals a foot. There it is. This one has to rotate all the way around, so I'll type rotate. And we'll rotate all the way around, and then I'll move this one back over. I'll select it and then move to display locked yes. And there we go. Last viewport, once again in the Layout tab, I'll choose the rectangular viewport button. And I'll go ahead and draw another viewport, and I'll zoom in on my last building elevation. There it is. Double click to get out of the viewport, select the viewport, come over to my standard scale, and change that to be 1/4 inch equals a foot. There it is. We have to do a little bit of rotation again, so I'll do rotate. And there it is. Adjust the viewport a bit. Like that. And then I'll choose display locked and choose yes. So now each one of my viewports has the display locked, which is good. Now it's a matter of kind of organizing all of these drawings on the page. And so right now they're just kind of splattered down because I had to get the viewport set. But I want to think about where they really belong. This floor plan probably could move over just a little bit. Let's push it over just a little bit there. And I want to make sure that this elevation lines up exactly with what's above it. So I could use my smart tracking. I'll move. This point matches up with that point. There we go, so that those two are nicely in a line. It's always good to keep your drawing nicely in a line. Now when it comes to these elevations, they don't really line up with anything because we've changed the orientation. However, it's kind of nice to think about how much space is between them, making sure that the drawings are kind of centered on each other. So move that over just a little bit. That. We'll move this one over just a little bit like that. Let's move this one up. Those look pretty good. Let's take all of these and let's move those down just a little bit. Yeah, I like it. I'm going to shorten this so that I can clip that off. OK, all of that seems fairly reasonable. At this point, I can do a test plot and just see what it looks like. So I'll go back to the home ribbon, and then I'll choose the print icon. And when I choose that print icon, the plot dialog box shows up. All of the defaults are already set because this was a layout. So I really don't have to do anything other than say OK. So it's meant to just say OK. I'm going to put it on the desktop for right now. This is my first test. And I'll go ahead and click on Save. It'll write the PDF, and then it'll open up Acrobat so I can take a look at my drawing. So as I look at the drawing here, there's a couple issues. And of course, I could see these issues ahead of time, but I'm going to point them out here once we've created it. And that is that the topography lines are running through all of my elevations. Well, that's a problem. So I could turn off the topography altogether, but that would cause it to turn off in this view, which I don't want to have happen. So I want to be able to turn off the topography layer only in these select viewports. So I can do that in AutoCAD, which is great. If I double-click to get inside of a particular viewport, so we'll do this one, I can then go to my Layer Properties button. And when I click on that, I have an option right here, and I'm going to make this a little bit bigger so you can see it, that says VP Freeze. So I have my regular on-off, I have my regular freeze-thaw, and then I have something special for VP Freeze. So that VP Freeze, if I were to click on the topography layer and click on the VP Freeze, the topography line is going to be turned off only in that viewport. It's not going to turn off in my plan or any of the other viewports. I'm going to switch over into each of these viewports and go to the topography layer and turn it off. I'll go into this, VP Freeze, there we go, and the last one right there. So that's now corrected those problems, which is good. At this point, I can go ahead and test plot again. I'll click on the print. Let me close Acrobat so that it can overwrite. I'll say OK. I'll put it on the desktop again. Yes, go ahead and overwrite it. And then it opens up. Great. I've gotten rid of those lines that were there, which is good. One thing to be aware of in Acrobat, if you, when you first look at this, sometimes you're not seeing all of your line weights, and you have to actually zoom in a bit. And once you zoom in, you should be able to see your line weights. Yeah, there we go. I'm starting to see some line weights. OK, so I have this set up. That's pretty good. But the other thing that happens is I'm still seeing these boxes, the viewport boxes. And I think those are distracting. I think I'd like to get rid of those altogether. So I'm going to do something special here, and that is I'm going to put each of the viewports on a non-printing layer. So I already have a guides layer that's a non-printing layer, but I'm going to go ahead and give myself a brand new layer and just call it no print. And for me personally, I always make my no prints green. It's just a personal preference, so I'm going to change them to be green. There it is. And I'm going to make sure that I click on the printer icon so it's a non-printing layer. I can then take all of my viewports. There's all 5 of my viewports. And I can move those viewports onto the no print layer. And now I see each of those highlighted in green. Now when I go to print, so once again I'll go back to the print icon here, and I say OK. We'll go ahead and overwrite it again. There we go. All of those viewports have gone away. And it's starting to look a lot more clean than it did before by getting rid of those viewports. That also means that I don't have to worry about lining up. This viewport has to end and match up with this viewport, or the drawings are just floating in the white space, which I think is a really good thing. So at this point, it's time to start going through and touching up my drawing. I saw in here earlier that my doors are all phantom lines, which is a mistake. My line type was incorrect, so I need to go back and correct that. I'm also seeing that some of these blocks have darker lines and lighter lines on them, so I need to correct that because they're not reading quite correctly. So you want to take kind of a look over your drawing and say what's reading correctly and what's not reading correctly, and make sure that you fit those. It looks like my elevations could use a little bit better line weights as well, because they're not reading particularly well other than the ground line itself. So I have some work to do just to kind of touch it up. But now that I've gotten to the point where I have a layout, I can jump to the layout, check it, go back, make corrections. Do another print, overwrite, look at it, make those corrections. And we kind of go through with a fine-tooth comb until we see what we like. So in terms of line types, I'm going to go back to Modelspace here really quick. I'm going to go into my layer properties, and I'm going to look at my doors layer. And doors, thank you. Yeah, my line type on my doors layer is incorrect. It's set as phantom. So I want to change that. I'm going to click on where it says line type, and I'm going to change it to continuous. And I'll go ahead and say OK. By the way, if you wanted a different line type and it wasn't showing here on the layer itself, you click on the line type, and you can go to this button for load, and this gives you access to all of the various AutoCAD line types that you might choose to use. When I do the hidden lines, I typically do the hidden 2, which is a tighter spaced set of hidden lines. I think that looks pretty good, and that's just a personal preference. So I'm telling you that along the way. And really, that's the primary line type that I tend to use. So I'll go ahead and say OK for right now. All right, all of that's good. And this is set back to continuous. That's good. My topography is set as a phantom line type. That's good as well. Like I said, I need to do a little bit more work on my elevations. The other thing that I was seeing was that these blocks were having issues. I had previously exploded those blocks to try to solve these issues. Doesn't look like I was able to get them solved. My color is by layer. My line type is by layer. So everything is correct. However, I was still getting pieces that were kind of overlapping or whatever. It's possible that I have lines, and again, I didn't draw these, that are overlapping on themselves. You can use a command called overkill. And when I do that, it's looking for lines that are on top of each other. So I'll type overkill, and then I'm going to go ahead and type all. This is looking for any lines that are on top of each other. And when I'll hit enter, and it's going to ask me what my tolerance is, etc. I'll go ahead and say OK. And it should have gotten rid of, yeah, there you go, 99 overlapping objects or segments were deleted. It's a way of getting rid of lines that are on top of other lines. So I've gone ahead and I've done that. I also noticed that my windows were too thick. I'm going to change those to 0.00 because they weren't reading quite right. So all of that should be good. I'll go back to my layout. There it is. We should see the update in the line type. Yep, my doors are correct now. That's good. And we'll go ahead and we'll plot this again. And I'll say OK. We'll go ahead and overwrite it. And there we go. Looks like they're still having some issues. I'm going to have to sort out what the issues are in those. Oh, no, they're reading OK. It was just a display problem. Yep, good. All right, so they all look good. I'll press Control-0 to see everything. And there we go. I have all of my layouts done. At this point, in order to post it, you have a PDF, but you don't have a JPEG of it yet. So we need to convert this into a JPEG to post. We'll spend more time next class on this conversion and doing some extra collage work in Illustrator. But the bottom line here is that we're going to open that PDF that I just created in Illustrator. So I'll go ahead and double click on Illustrator. And I'm going to open that PDF file that was on my desktop. There it is. We'll go ahead and say open. and it will load up. Let me press Control 0 so I can see everything. Oops. Control 0. There it is. If your orientation is off, that's OK. Don't worry about it for today's purposes. I have this set up. At this point, I'll go to File and then Export, and we'll export as. And I'm going to choose not an AutoCAD drawing, but either a PNG or a JPEG, one or the other. There it is as a JPEG. I'm going to check this box for Use Artboards. That just matches the paper size for sure. And then I'll go ahead and export. It's going to go on the desktop as well. Color model, this would be for posting, so we're going to leave it as RGB. That's good. Quality, we're going to bump it up to maximum. And our resolution here, we're going to go up to 300. So it's kind of like when we were doing this in InDesign, where we put the quality at maximum and we change the resolution to 300. I'll go ahead and say OK. And that will then write the JPEG file of this drawing layout for me. And so there it is as a JPEG file, which of course opens in Microsoft Paint, which I never quite understood. But there it is. So that will allow you to make your post for today, so you have the JPEG file to use. So as I said earlier, I was going to come back and show you how to deal with the topography, which we hadn't done just yet. I'm going to go ahead and open my file from last class, which is different than the sample file I used today, because this one already has the topography on it. Go ahead and open it up. Sorry, I was trying to find where my file was from last class. There it is. So there's my file from last class. And I wanted to figure out where this topography line really falls. And so I need to be able to calculate the slope along this building. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and turn off my guides layer, because I find it distracting. And I'm going to create a new layer. And on this new layer, I'm going to call it Topo Guides. And I'll also make the Topo Guides layer a different color. I'll make it red. And I'm going to make that a non-printing layer as well. We'll make it the current layer so that when I draw, my guides will show up on that particular layer. So when I start to think about the terrain or the contour going in front of this elevation, I need to find the plane right in the very front of my building. So I'm going to create an X line. I can say X line, or I can pick this button here. And I'm going to draw the X line right in front of my building. So it goes all the way along in front of the building. And the X line is just a ray that goes in both directions. I could do it with a ray that goes in one way and the other way, but an X line just saves me a step and goes off into infinity in both directions. So I've set that line first. Now I need to identify the points where this construction line crosses the topography. And I'm not too worried about way over here where it crosses the topography or way over here. I just need to go 3 or 4 in either direction of where my building is. Then I'll go ahead and create a set of rays. So I'll go ahead and type in ray. And each point where it intersects, I'll draw a ray. That's probably enough. I'll do one more to right there. So I haven't done all of them. I've just used a set of them that are kind of nearby. Now on each one of these topography lines, I'm changing vertically by a foot. So I know that there's going to be a series of lines that are changing by a foot each. Let me go back to my construction line. So I'll go ahead and type X line. And I'll pick a point down here in space just as a starting place. So there I am. I'm going to take this and copy it up at 1 foot intervals. So I'll copy, and I'm going to go up by 1 foot. and I'll go up by 2 feet, I'll go up by 3 feet, and I'll go up by 4 feet. So I have a series of parallel lines that are all 1 foot apart. The topography slopes from this side going up that way, so this is going to be my low point right there. So I now need to draw a curve that connects between each of these intersections. And I want it to be smooth. So instead of picking just a regular line or a polyline, which will give me a straight line, I'm going to choose something called a spline. It's right here. And so if I type in spline or choose this button, that's fine. Actually, I should change my layer first. Let me go back to my south elevation. There it is. And I'll go back and choose my spline. I will then snap to the first point. I'll move up by 1 point. There's my second point. I'll come over. There's my third point. There's my fourth point. And last, there's my fifth point. So I end up with this line here that is the line of the, or the slope of the topography along that elevation. And I'll go ahead and I'm going to override the thickness here so you can see it a little bit better. Let's bump it up to maybe 0.7. And so there's the slope. I now need to move this up. And when I move it up, I'm going to move it right to where it intersects my building, so right there. So let me create a ray. We'll start there and we'll go straight down. I'll find where that one intersects right there. I'll take this, I'll move it using the intersection. We'll come straight up, and there's the slope, as opposed to the flat line that I had drawn before. After I do that, I have to extend this down so that it meets the ground. So I'll type extend, and then all, so that I can select each of these. And we'll drop all of those lines down to where they meet that now sloping ground. Make sense? I'm going to do it again for this elevation. I won't do it for all the elevations. Be aware that it's going to start getting really cluttered if I have too many of these topo line guides. So you may want to go in and delete these before you move to the next elevation. So I'll go ahead and turn those off, or delete them. And then I'm going to rotate my view so that I'm looking at the east elevation, such as it is. And now I'm going to do the same thing. So I'm on the Topo Guides layer. I'm going to start with an X line. And I'm going to make it in plane with my building. This is really easy because it's a flat wall all the way along. And then I'm going to find the places where that intersects the topo. So I'll go back to my ray command. We'll start there. Start there. Start there. And go to right there. Now I need the line at the bottom. So I'll go to X line again, going in both directions. There's my first one. And then I need to copy it. And it's going to be at 1 foot, 2 feet, 3 feet, and 4 feet. Actually, I think I have one extra there. I'll switch to my east elevation layer. There it is. I'll come back to my spline tool here. Again, this is the lower side, so I'll start at the low side, and we'll move up. We'll move up, and we'll move up. So in that time, I didn't need the extra line on top, but this is now the slope on this side of the building. So we'll go ahead and make that a little bit thicker so you guys can see it, and there's that slope. So this, however, gets a little bit trickier in that I have to match up on this corner right there. The terrain hits the building at this point, which is further down than it is here. So I need to make that correction. So I'm going to turn back on my regular guides, and I'm going to create a ray and jump into my Topo Guides here. I'm going to create a ray at the point where this building touches the ground there. I'll find where that intersects my 45-degree reflection. I'll repeat my ray there. And so where the building meets that point, that's where my new terrain is going to go. So I'll take this, I'll move it. It's going to go up, and it's going to fall right there. Oops, looks like I didn't quite get it correctly. It's going to fall right there. So I'll get rid of my original ground line, and then I need to extend the lines down here till they hit the ground. Let me turn off my guides and my Topo Guides just to make this a little bit clearer. Oops. Change to the east elevation. And then we'll turn off the Topo Guides. There we go. So there's the slope on this side of the building. So we need to extend it, so I'll type extend all. And the reason I'm typing all is it saves me from having to individually select. I'm just selecting everything. And there it is on this side of the building. As I move to the front, it would be sloping the opposite way. So I'd start at this low point, because this front corner right here is the lowest point of the ground. It would slope back up and back up to meet this side over here. Okay? So if that seemed like it was too complicated, you can do it just a straight line. I'm okay with that. But I wanted to at least technically instruct you in how you would construct what that slope would be. For those of you that feel comfortable and want to try to do it, I would encourage you to do it. So the goal today is to get your layout done, to be able to do that initial layout phase. If you have extra time, this one, so I want you to get here. If you haven't finished all the elevations yet, you could just create a box where you think the elevation is going to go so that you get it set up in your layout view, then go back to your model space and continue working. You should have extra time today to keep working on your other elevations. So if I went back to model space here, you'll be able to finish the rest of the elevations. You have a little more than 2 hours left in lab time. So get your elevations done, get your layout done. Next class, we're going to take this whole PDF, bring it into Illustrator, start to do some collage work, add some text, those kinds of things to enhance it. Okay? I will also next class talk about printing, because remember, part of the requirement for this assignment is that you actually have to do a plot. We'll talk through the specifics of how that works next class so that you'll be ready going forward. Next Friday, the 26th, is the last week to drop with a W. I'm going to do refreshed grade sheets. You'll get those next week so you know where you currently stand in the class. If I'm concerned about anybody not passing, I'll try to send you an email saying I'm a little concerned. But those of you that are all here probably are just fine. It's the people that aren't here that I'm worried about. So just a reminder, maybe it's not for this class, but it's certainly a reminder just on the broader sense that that deadline date is coming. That also means that as of next Wednesday, we're more than 75% of the way through the class. So we don't have a lot left. After today's lecture, I think I was calculating it out. We have 4 weeks left of lectures, which means there's 8 total lectures, and then a week of finals. And that's it. So you have 5 weeks left in the semester as a whole. So it's coming to an end, which could be a good thing or could be a bad thing, depending on your perspective. All right, so unless you guys have any questions, I'll let you guys start working. No? All right.